Hi friends, hope you're doing well. This is going to be a prophecy update. Basically, this is going to be a call to the church to wake up and know what time it is. Unfortunately, prophecy isn't highly taught in the churches, and I think that's there's just been this really, I think, almost satanic deception that's gone into the church, that somehow there is no pre-tribulation rapture, and therefore, because of that, we don't really have to worry about prophecy anymore, because we're going to know when we're in the tribulation, and when we get to that point, then we're going to have to live through this, and there's no point even knowing about the end times of prophecy, because it's not relevant. Because this movement to somehow dismiss the ideal or premise of the pre-tribulation rapture, and you hear some fairly popular preachers, some that many I've respected over the years. They'll come out and it's very strange. They'll talk about taking a literal interpretation of Scripture and so forth, and yet when it comes to prophecy, they'll say, "Well, it's just allegorical language. It's just apocalyptic language," and then they'll allegorize Revelation or the Scriptures in general. That's a real problem. That's a real issue, and it shows you and I don't think they do it out of trying to deceive anybody. I'm not saying that. I think these pastors are good, well-intentioned in a lot of ways, but their time of study and attention has been in areas more centered or focused on soteriology, Christology, these kind of areas, which are extremely important. Don't get me wrong. The church desperately needs that teaching, no doubt about it. But the prophetic aspect of it is eschatology is also equally important, and I think more so now than any other time in history. And unfortunately, what you see happening in the church is this movement away from understanding prophecy and informing Christians so that they can be prepared. And not only that, understanding the time and understanding that the pre-tribulation rapture is absolutely biblically sound and is the one that best harmonizes prophetic Scripture. And why it's so essential and why I'm bringing that up is because the events that are taking place are pointing to, I believe, the soon revealing of the Antichrist, which I believe the church is going to see, and we're going to be here to see it, but I think the rapture will soon occur after that. But I also believe that, and I'm going to point out some facts here that I think are pointing to the fact that, showing and demonstrating that the Gog-Magog war is at hand, which specifically states that it's in the end times, or the end of this age. And that means that the revealing of the Antichrist has to be soon. It means he has to be probably on the political scene in some way. And we need to know who that is, and then we need to understand the ramifications of that. And that's why this is probably going to be a multi section videos that I'm going to do. I'm probably going to do several, most likely, on this subject. So, but I want to do this one for sure and put it out there, and we'll see what the response is. But certainly, it's extremely important, and why I'm making these claims. And I don't make them, and the people say, this guy's just, he's just one of those wacky, fundamentalist Christians, or extreme Christians, or whatever, that doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, I've studied this very carefully. Many other Christians have studied this very carefully over the years. Many have written about it. So the information I'm going to give to you is extremely important. And if you don't pay attention to anything else, you need to pay attention to this video. If you haven't studied and you haven't looked at it, then this video is definitely for you. This series of videos is going to be for you. So anyway, one of the things that is happening is that somehow there's just been this movement that somehow you can just dismiss the ideal, the premise of the imminency of Jesus Christ coming back for His church, and somehow that gets really wonky and really warped by some of the people who are teaching it. And I understand that. But the reality, and those who are standing against it, by and large, are seem like they're gravitating to this kind of post-tribulation worldview, which is there's a rapture, but it's at the end of the tribulation period, which has numerous problems with that belief system. And I won't go into that, because this video is going to be more about the wake-up call to the church, and knowing what time it is, and realizing that we are right at the cusp, I believe, of the end times. And I'm going to give you proof for why I'm making that claim. I'm not just going to make that claim and say, well, I think it's there, or I believe it is, and just believe me. No, I'm going to give you actual evidence that I believe is absolutely pointing to, and you can look at it for yourself, but this evidence is going to be pointing to the fact that we are, in my opinion, living right at the edge of these prophetic events that we've been looking for a long time. The Gog-Magog war, the revealing of the Antichrist, and then ultimately that means everything that encompasses, which would be that the Antichrist kingdom has to come on the scene. A 10-nation confederation that will have to come on the scene at that period of time, that we should expect to see that, which also means there has to be a beast economic system, because we know from Revelation 13 that there's going to be a mark of the beast, the 666, the infamous 666 number, and how that's going to be implemented. You can't buy, sell, or trade unless you have this economic mark. And if you don't have it, you won't be able to buy, sell, or trade. You won't be able to function in society. Are we seeing those things? And I believe we are. And all these things have to come on the scene at approximately the same time, because Antichrist's reign is only 7 years. And he comes on the scene prior to that 7-year period of time, which a lot of Christians are sometimes surprised when they hear that. But, and once you actually explain it to them, the light seems to come on, and you realize they sit there and kind of go like, well, duh, yeah, you're right. He has to be on the scene before the signing of the 7-year peace agreement, which he confirms according to Daniel chapter 9. That is the beginning of the final week of Daniel, which coincides with the 7 years of tribulation, where we get the 7-year tribulation period of time. And it's in the midst of the 7 years he goes in and breaks it, and then commences the great tribulation of the last 3.5 years. A lot of people have read these things, and for some reason over time it just hasn't been taught, so they forget these things, or they've never been taught this. And that's what I usually find, is a lot of Christians have never been taught this information, and they're really shocked when they hear it. So it's again, this video series is going to be for you if you've never heard this information, or if you just haven't looked at it in a long time. But I'm going to give you evidence of why I believe it's important, and then maybe towards the end, I'm going to address the rapture question again, and why I believe the pre-tribulation rapture is so essential and so important for you to examine, look at, and understand that it is biblically sound and true. And in fact, it's the only one that makes any sense when you stop and actually analyze it from a biblical point of view. And I will point out the verses for you and show you why pre-tribulation rapture isn't just escapism or wishful thinking or anything like that. I think it's an essential doctrine for every Christian to believe. And a lot of people look at it and go, boy, it's a secondary issue. We should just kind of choose to disagree on that. And if you want to choose to disagree on it, I get that. But I do believe that it's an essential doctrine because of a number of reasons that's going to be intertwined with ultimately how you look at Scripture, how you look at how Christians will ultimately go about evangelization in these last days, and how that it's intertwined into a lot of other doctrines. But for now, we're going to focus on the wake-up call for the church. And I think that's essential right now, is that we need to have a wake-up call for the church, because I think the hour is very short, very near. So one of the things that we're seeing is an alliance of Russia, Iran, and Turkey. Those three have been talked about and written about for many years by Christians, that, hey, we need to be looking for this alliance. It's never been there before, and we need to be looking for it. Many Christians have talked about it. I've personally read about it, talked about it, have been looking for it numerous years. And here we are at a point when you see Russia, Turkey, and Iran in an alliance, and strangely enough, on the mountains of Israel, north of its mountains of Israel, in the borders in what we call modern day Syria. Exactly like the Bible in Ezekiel 38 and 39 talks about, after Ezekiel 36 and 37, where you have the reviving of Israel back in its land. If those factors weren't there, none of this would be relevant. I wouldn't be making this video, and none of this would make any sense, and people would have no need to even listen to this video, or anybody claiming that the end times or the end of this age is very near. But the fact that those things exist, Israel has been regathered back to its land, that Israel is a single nation with one ruler, and that you do have, in its northern border of Syria, you have instability, and you have the exact people that Ezekiel 38 and 39 prophesied, the Gog-Magog alliance. So anyway, let's go ahead and look at that real quick. And I think that's essential, or very important. And so Ezekiel 38 and 39 basically says that there is going to be this alliance of nations. And I won't go into every detail of it for sure, but I'm going to just point them out, some of the specifics. So you have, where it talks about in Ezekiel 38, it says that God has given a warning, a prophecy, and a warning about this alliance that's going to come in the latter days. Verse 8 of 38 says that it's in the latter days. It says, after many days you will be summoned in the latter years. You will be come to the land that had been restored from the sword, whose inhabitants have been gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual waste. Exactly what we saw. Israel and the land of Israel was a continual waste, and the people have been scattered among the nations, and then suddenly they've been brought back, and here they are in Israel. And in that process, you have the reestablishment of the nation of Israel under a single one. It's no longer Judah, Judea, and the kingdom of Israel. You don't have that division. Well, instead you have one nation, just like it talked about. So anyway, we have in that fulfillment of that prophecy comes about ultimately this prophecy that follows it. So you have the reestablishment of Israel, 1947, May 14th, one kingdom, one ruler over them, and then you have ultimately this Gog-Magog war alliance which follows right after Ezekiel 36, 37 that talks about this, and then ultimately what will follow after that, which I believe will be the rebuilding of the Jewish temple, but that'll be later. But we're going to look at this, and it just basically confirms what I'm saying, that when we see this alliance, it's going to be in the latter years. It's going to be at the end times. So it's not like this is going to be something that's going to take place, and then, hundreds of years later, there's going to be the fulfillment of the end times. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that this is an end times prophecy. So as Christians, we should be looking at that. We should be looking at the Gog-Magog war as one of the events that is going to be a flagpole, as it were, to indicate that we're in the end times, that we're at the end of the age. And some of the other things that we should be looking for, then at that point we get into the rapture verses, that's also at the end of the age. And we know that the rise of the Antichrist is at the end of the age, and the tribulation period is at the end of the age. So there's a number of events that's going to take place in this very narrow window of time, a very short period of time, probably within the next, within the last 7 to 10 years of this age, as before we go into the Messianic age of Christ. It mentions in Ezekiel 38 and 39 who some of these antagonists are against Israel. And it points out the key figure is the land of Gog-Magog, which is the prince of Rosh, Meshesh, and Tubal, which is modern-day Russia. How do we know that for sure? Well, Ezekiel 39 kind of goes into that in verse 2, and it says that when it's talking about who this person is, it says, and I will take you and turn you around and drive you on, take you up from the remotest, and notice it says remotest, parts of the north, and bring you up against the mountains of Israel. So if you go from Israel to the remotest part north, you're going to come directly to Russia. There's no one else there. So there's a clear indication of who Rosh, Meshesh, and Tubal is. A lot of people try to dismiss that, and it's talking about Turkey, or it's talking about this, or it's talking about that. Turkey is mentioned in its original languages, or names that were given to it, but we'll come to that here real quick. The point is, though, I'm saying is, you draw a line north of Israel, and you go to the remotest nation that you can go all the way north, and you'll find that it's Russia. And in fact, Russia has made claims on the North Pole even. So even if you went to say, people try to say, well, it's the North Pole, well, Russia lays claim to the North Pole, and that's why there have been some antagonisms going on there as well. So again, it's just right. That's the only nation that's there that you could point to. Then you have, in verse 5, you have Persia, modern-day Iran. That's an easy one. You have Ethiopia, which is primarily, it's not the nation of Ethiopia, I don't believe. It's talking about the historic people of Ethiopia, which would be primarily the black Africans that are primarily Islamic in those regions. And then you have Put, which most people have identified as Libya. And then it goes on to say that in verse 6, Gomar and Beth Togarmah from the remote parts of the north. Well, if you go remote, not the remotest, but just a remote, you're in, if you look at it in that sense, you got, because you got Turkey, the Black Sea, and then you have Russia, which would be the remotest north. So if you look at that, and then you have the identification, obviously, of Gomar, Beth Togarmah, which is Anatolia area, region, Asia Minor / Turkey. That is the area that it's talking about. So if you draw a line from Israel going north, that's what you're going to find, Turkey and then Russia. Those are the two of the primary antagonists, with Persia being the other one, or Iran. And then you also have Ethiopia and Put. Who do we have right now in an alliance? You have Russia, Turkey, and Iran in alliance in Syria with Libya in play, which is antagonistic as well towards Israel, and so is some other of the black African nations, such as Sudan and others, which would be fitting for them to be part of this coalition that will come against Israel. And I think we're on the verge of seeing them come against Israel. And again, don't forget that the verses, what it said that in verse 8, that it would be in the latter times or latter years. This is telling you that it's at the end of this age, end of the time when the nations have run their course. And that brings us to, obviously, Daniel, which we'll get into for the rise of the Antichrist, which I think is very near. First, I want to just play just a little bit of a snippet of a audio. I should be able to hear it. And basically, it's going to affirm what I'm telling you that's taking place right now. There was recently just a alliance meeting. I call it the Gog-Magog alliance meeting that took place, and that is Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Obviously, Russia's having a lot of issues in its battle and its war with Ukraine, which I think is going to play a role in ultimately in deciding its fate to go down into Israel against its own will. And that goes into the whole idea of the Gog-Magog chapters, where it talks about God putting hooks into the jaws of Gog-Magog and drawing him down into this war against Israel. In essence, going against his better judgment, I believe, going against what he would otherwise do, but because acting out of a form of need or desperation or whatever, deception, ultimately he winds up committing Russia into an invasion along with Turkey, Iran, Libya, and again, what we call traditionally Ethiopia, or the Islamic African nations, to come into Israel in this invasion. That will fail, by the way, and God will ultimately destroy this army, as we will see in Ezekiel 38 and 39. I won't read it, but obviously it's there if you want to take a chance, take a little bit of time to read that. 2 short chapters, and it won't take very long to read through that. You'll see what I'm talking about. I'll play just a short snippet of this. This is a report.
And here in the Middle East, many observers see the summit between these three major powers in the region as a signal to the United States.
It says a clear signal that Russia, a strong power, and 2 other strong Middle Eastern powers, such as Turkey and Iran, those are the most populous states in the region, are working together, cooperating, and they may cooperate, obviously, against American interests.
Middle East expert Ephraim Inbar says both the enemies and allies of the U.S. in the region see America as a weak power under the Biden administration.
Biden is not considered seriously in the Middle East. He's not considered a serious actor because America is weak. And in the Middle East, states and leaders are treating with respect only powerful leaders and powerful nations that are ready to act militarily to attain their interests.
Analysts warn that the combination of the growing alliance of Russia, Iran, and Turkey, along with a weak U.S. administration and Iran racing towards a nuclear bomb, all put increasing pressure on Israel.
On this issue, time is not on Israel's side. It's quite clear that the Iranians are progressing quite quickly toward a bomb. They have the missiles to carry. They have probably to overcome the hurdle of weaponization. And this makes Israeli action quite urgent.
All right, so there you go. Israeli action is quite urgent, and that's why I think if the Gog-Magog war is happening, that tells us what? By Scripture, not me reinterpreting or reading into it, or Christians reading into it, or anything like that. It's simply looking at what's happening in the world and then reading it through the lens or prism of Scripture. And it says that clearly in Ezekiel 38, verse 8, that it's in the latter years. It's at the end times. That would tell us that the other events that I mentioned are also are in play then. That means we should be looking for, and that's why it kind of blows me away, but we should be looking for the Antichrist rise. He should be in some way involved in a peace agreement. And just so happens there is an Abrahamic peace accords going on right now, and the process of those are happening. It's in its infant stages of it, as it were, but it's happening, and it's been going on for a little while now, and it's been gaining traction. This isn't my, making this up. This is real. I mean, you've seen UAE and other countries sign on to this agreement, which is historic. And then you have nations that are kind of waffling a little bit, but they're there. They're prepared for peace, but they haven't come right out and announced it. And that would be the big one. Obviously, it would be Saudi Arabia is a big one that they've been talking about. And they say, well, they're really close. Well, what does that mean? Again, I think they're right. It's really close. And I think ultimately the Antichrist will be the one to seal the deal on that. You have major movements of the embassy of the United States, which I believe that we should be looking for embassy of Israel, of America, to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, in essence acknowledging the restoration of Jewish control and sovereignty over Jerusalem. In essence, restoring the fortunes of Jerusalem. The only one that hasn't yet is Judea, which would be modern day Samaria and Judea and Samaria, which would be West Bank. Once that's signed on, then the whole concept of the Joel 3 prophecy comes into play, where it talks about the restoration of Jerusalem and Judea would be the indicating sign for bringing the nations down for judgment. In essence, the apocalypse, or what we talk about, Armageddon. So what it's referring to in Revelation, which ultimately we see played out in Revelation chapter 19. That will come, but it will come at the end of the 7-year tribulation period of time. But the point is that what we're seeing, if the Gog-Magog war alliance is now forming right before our eyes, and Israel's being forced to act, and there's a number of things in play there, and that would be that Israel obviously can't allow for Iran to build a base right on its northern border in Syria and attack its citizens in its country and undermine its sovereignty, and at the same time build nuclear weapons where they could funnel that to Hezbollah or some other group and attack Israel, or launch missiles from Syria into Israel, where they wouldn't have time to even respond because the how close they are in proximity to Israel just wouldn't allow for them to stop a ballistic missile, or even a non-ballistic missile, just one launched. You can even have artillery launched nuclear weapons. I mean, it'd be almost impossible to stop. And so Israel just absolutely cannot allow for Iran to build its military infrastructure, base for an operational base in Syria. And that's why they've been attacking Syria installations almost on a nightly basis for a number of years now. And the world, is kind of like, well, you can't do that. But they're kind of like, well, they kind of give them a bit of a pass, because they realize they have to, because who's else going to stand up? Nobody else is stopping this coalition of nations that's allowing it to take place, including Russia, who's really the main player in Syria with its air force and military that's there. As we've seen that Putin has been slowly building an alliance between Erdogan in Turkey and the Ayatollahs in Iran. So the coalition is real. It's been built. It's there. It's on the mountains of Israel. It's preparing for its military conflict with Israel. And I think this war in Ukraine may be the catalyst with the oil things that are taking place, because Israel has agreed to pass oil, natural gas over to Egypt, who would then run it up into Europe as a way to offset the losses of oil that Russia has cut off, or at least delayed, into Europe. And Russia is economically very predisposed to have that oil and the money from Europe. I mean, they're very dependent upon it. And that opens the door where they have to stop Israel, Egypt from allowing for this oil and natural gas to go up into Europe, because that would cut the lifeline of the economic lifeline, as it were, of Russia, where they depend upon from Europe getting this money that they get from natural gas and oil that they send to throughout Europe. And that's a problem. So you have a reason for Russia to be pulled into an invasion of Israel, a necessity, and that is to stop them from producing their oil and natural gas and running a pipeline through Cyprus up into Greece, which they've talked about, and also through Egypt. They've also talked about doing it that way, and they've actually signed an agreement for that, which was very historic, and that was not that long ago. That was signed, that Israel has agreed with Egypt to basically run natural gas, processes it in Egypt, and run it up into Europe. So you're talking about an element of destroying Russia's economy, and that's a real danger to Putin and Russia, and I think they're going to be forced to act. So those are some of the things that I've laid a foundation now to show you that we are looking at a real event historically where you have the Gog-Magog alliance forming right before our eyes. That should be a wake-up call to the church. Every Christian should be hearing this and knowing it and saying, wow, this is pointed to the end of this age. The end of this age is upon us, which means the other events, which I'm going to address in the next video, is here. We should be looking for someone who's involved in a peace accord that is highly intelligent. Most likely, he's Jewish. And the reason why I say it is not because I have any kind of bent towards Jews. I love the Jewish people, love Israel. Let me put that out there. It's because when it talks about him in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, going into the temple and declaring himself to be God, there's only two conclusions you have to draw from that. And many thought, well, it's going to be a lot like he's going to go in there and by power and force and just take over and declare himself to be God. I don't think that's what it's saying. I think he goes in by deception, and that's what he even says in Ezekiel, or in 2 Thessalonians, that he uses signs and wonders to deceive the world. And the world includes Israel. Remember, this is a world that doesn't have Christ. It doesn't believe in Christ. And the church won't be, the church will be raptured. You obviously will have the tribulation saints, but they'll be persecuted and ultimately killed by the Antichrist. No, I believe the Antichrist will go into the temple, a rebuilt temple, and that rebuilt temple will be part of the peace agreement that will be part of that, where it'll be a temporary 7-year peace accord, and part of that will be that the Jews are allowed to rebuild their temple. And obviously, what holds that back right now, the Muslims wouldn't be in a way to say anything. Who's going to be there for them? Turkey would be gone, Iran would be gone, Russia would be gone. There's really no one there to be their advocate to stand against this, oppose this in any real way. And at the end of the day, the supernatural protection of Israel will send a shockwave throughout Islam to the point that I think it will rattle it to its theological core, foundation, as it were. And you'll see many Muslims, I think, turning away from Islam and embracing other ideologies, including primarily Christianity and believing in Jesus Christ after they see the prophecies fulfilled in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Some will obviously turn into other things and other beliefs. And many will believe in this coming Messiah. And that's what I think he's going to come as, the God-man, the Messiah. When he talks about him claiming to be God, I think he will come in and claim to be the prophesied Jewish Messiah, and that he's the God-man, and people will give their allegiance to him and their worship to him. And they will see the supernatural things that he does, and he will deceive them with those lying wonders and signs. But he will go in under a peace platform, and through that peace he will destroy many. Well, we know that as he rides out on that white horse, and war follows after that, it's in this peace accord, the Abraham peace accord is possible potentially, which I think it probably is. If this is the Gog-Magog alliance, then we know that there can't be room for many other peace accords to take place for many years. It's going to happen relatively quickly, and this Abraham peace accord is really gain traction and ground. So we should be looking at this as the primary point of fulfillment of Daniel 9, where it talks about this peace accord that's taking place. I believe that the Abraham Accords is that Daniel 9:27 peace accords that the Antichrist will confirm. And for him to confirm it, he has to be in power. And that'll bring us to ultimately the Antichrist 10-nation coalition that has to be on the scene. And then by that, an economic system, world system, that will become the world economic instituted economy, money, whatever you want to call it, will also take place as well. So all this has to be in play, and just so happens, it all is. There's a lot of instability in the world right now. You actually have banking collapsing that are going on in a number of places. Sri Lanka, you have, it started there. Now it's in China. China banks are in serious trouble. It's not even hardly being reported, because I think the media, we found that you can't believe in what the media is reporting anymore. They are completely under the control of other people and other forces. So you really can't, and even your social platforms are highly censored. Just ask any Christian who's posted anything. I've had numerous videos and numerous, for sure, comments, that's been, censored, and none of it's, vulgar or violent or hateful or anything like that. It's just critiquing information, putting out information about how Christ is the only way to salvation, things like that, and it's blocked my comments and so forth. So that should tell you that it's highly censored on the internet, and the media is highly censored. It's not like I'm sitting there advocating violence or hatred or anything like that. And many other Christians can tell you the same thing. They're also being censored. The truth of Jesus Christ, the message has got to get out there. But remember, the media is not your friend, and they're certainly working and under the sway, I believe, of the evil one. And unfortunately, the countries and nations and the people that are supposedly to protect you, even the police enforcement, law enforcement, and so forth, aren't doing it. They're protecting special groups, and we know who those special groups are. And certainly not Christians. And we need to be aware of that. So anyway, we'll pick up in the second one. I want to pick up where I believe that we should be looking for the Antichrist and his peace platform, and ultimately that means his economic system as well, and how I think that's happening right now. And I'll try to provide proof for that as well for you. Anyway, God bless you. Be safe. Keep looking up. We'll see you.